Brought to you by Penguin.
The See-Through House by Shelley Klein. Read by Shelley Klein. Return to High Sunderland. Requirements. On an isolated site between Selkirk and Peebles, this house, known as High Sunderland, was required to be easily run and to provide maximum comfort for a household of 5. Kitchen and dining room were to be separated, and special provision was required for children and weekend guests. Architecture and Building, 1958. I am sitting in a van alongside all my worldly possessions, driving north on the M6. 450 miles behind me is the tiny fishing village of Port Isaac in Cornwall, where I have lived for the past 12 years. 60 miles ahead of me is a house called High Sunderland in the Scottish borders. This is where I was born and grew up. I turn off the motorway onto the A7. Night has fallen, but even so, I don't need to see the landscape to know what it looks like. I have driven this road hundreds of times, know its hills and valleys, scoured with gorse, its forests and fields sutured together by dry stone walls. This region has a brutal history, with clans from either side of the border invading each other's homesteads, stealing livestock, slaughtering one another, acts that still echo through the countryside in names such as Bloody Burn and Slain Men's Lee. But this place is also about farming, about uplands and lowlands and the sheep that graze on them, about wool and water and weaving. It is no accident that for centuries the borders relied on the textile trade, because the rivers that scour this terrain once turned the wheels of this industry, while the rain that filled those rivers not only produced some of the finest grazing in the whole of the country, it is woven into the landscape in the way trees stream across hills and rivers flow down the valleys. Snow begins to fall, and I start to wonder whether, when I get to High Sunderland, I will make it up our driveway, or whether I'll get stuck and have to abandon the van and walk the rest of the way on foot. I know my father Berry will be worried. He'll be standing in the hallway, hovering around the front door, waiting to spot my headlights. Sure enough, 50 minutes later, as I spin and slide dangerously up the drive, I spy a small figure standing in the doorway, beaming from ear to ear, while a flurry of snowflakes drifts past his nose. Ever since my mother died a year ago, I have known that Berry wanted me to come back and live with him. This is not because he can't cope on his own, for despite being 85 years old, he is still very capable. But he's lonely and isolated, and my older brother and sister, Jonathan and Gillian, have families to look after and jobs that they can't just up and leave, which leaves only single, self-employed, childless me. I jump out of the van and crunch my way across the front courtyard, where Berry gives me one of his great big bear hugs. There are 39 years between us, 1 world war, 5 languages and 2 countries, but Berry and my mother Peggy have given me the only 2 things truly worth having: love and security. This is nice, isn't it? He beams, and I nod because it's true. It is nice to be back, for despite leaving High Sunderland nearly 27 years previously to go to university in London, and despite having lived in numerous rented flats throughout the city, and more recently my fisherman's cottage in Cornwall, I still consider High Sunderland the only real home I have ever had. I was born here and I grew up here, and every year since, no matter what was happening in the rest of my life, I have spent at least 1 or 2 weeks here during the summer and every Christmas with the exception of 2. I step into the hallway and immediately breathe in a mixture of familiar smells: paprika, wood smoke and freshly ground coffee. It is the most relaxing smell in the world, a smell that says I am back where I belong. But 10 minutes later, just as I am carrying all my stuff into the hallway from the van, my mood takes a turn for the worse. Berry: "Darling, what's that?" Shelley, carrying a battered Victorian chair in her hands: "My furniture." Berry: "But we have furniture here." Shelley: "I know, but this is my furniture." Berry, why is there so much of it? Shelley, I haven't lived at home since I was 17. Berry, what's your age got to do with bringing back furniture? Shelley, what do you imagine I've been sitting on for the past 27 years? Berry, I can't say I've thought about it. Shelley, increasingly irritated, it's a nice chair. Berry, but we have nice furniture here. Shelley, not my furniture. Berry, doesn't matter. Shelley, it does to me. Besides, you might grow to like it. Berry, I won't. Shelley, how do you know? Berry, because your furniture is ghastly. This was a typical Berry-like comment of the type that drove me around every bend this side of Hadrian's Wall, because, besides being one of the kindest, most generous men I knew, my father was also one of the most difficult. So why, you might ask, had I agreed to come back to live with him? The answer lies at the heart of the second argument Berry and I had, which took place barely 24 hours after the one regarding my furniture. Only this time it involved 6 little pots that I had brought with me that were planted with thyme, rosemary, chives, parsley, lemon thyme, and marjoram. Just as I began arranging them on the kitchen windowsill, Berry appeared at my shoulder. Berry, would you mind putting those somewhere else? Shelley, why? They look nice here. Berry, why don't you put them in your bedroom, if you wouldn't mind? Shelley, but they're herbs. They're for cooking with. Berry, they'd be better off in your bedroom. Shelley, I'm not trotting through to the bedroom every time I need a bit of time. Berry, suddenly you can't walk a little? Shelley, irritated, what have you got against herbs? Berry, they're messy. Shelley, they're plants. Berry, they're messy plants, except for the chives. Shelley, and the chives have what going for them that the others haven't? Berry, they're vertical. Shelley, through gritted teeth, all plants are vertical. Berry, but some are more vertical than others. Shelley, you're joking, right? Berry, they spoil the line of the house. Shelley, the what? Berry, patiently, as if explaining something to an imbecile. The line of the house. And that was that. I knew immediately there was no point continuing to fight the herbs corner, or in this case, windowsill. For as long as I can remember, it has been understood within our family that High Sunderland is not simply a house. One close friend, Jenny, described it as a Mondrian set within a Klimt, because with its series of colourful glass panels set against the backdrop of birch and fir trees, it is like living within a work of art. Not only that, but the house, which was built in the modernist vernacular, dictates how one should live, what one should pay attention to, and what one should ignore. It is a deceptively simple structure, yet ultimately a highly complex amalgamation of ideas and ideals, a timepiece and a time machine, as well as a combination of two men's ambitions, that of the architect Peter Womersley, whose first proper commission this was, and a young Yugoslavian émigré to Britain, my father, who commissioned the project. Over the next 56 years, Berry was to become so attached to High Sunderland, it was almost impossible, to my mind at least, to separate the two things out from each other. My father was the house was my father. Built in the late 50s, High Sunderland makes no apologies for looking towards the future rather than gazing nostalgically towards the past. Like Berry himself, whom an acquaintance once noted was far more modern than any of his children, High Sunderland is more up-to-date than most contemporary housing. As you approach it from the driveway through a thick forest of pine trees, it appears at the top of the hill as a low-slung series of interconnecting boxes and grids. Planes of both clear and coloured glass are interlaced with white horizontal beams that in their turn are balanced between sections of rigid macaw wood that, because they don't lie flat, lend each panel a tactile quality normally reserved for fabric. At night, when the internal lights are...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?